I'm Dan Keldsen, co-founder of PlexiCam.com, and this is Insights for Pros, a series of short videos from experts around the world with the goal of helping you level up your career. Or as my guest Tisha's site states, helping high performers elevate their awesomeness. And I have to say that is one of the best taglines I've heard. I don't think it's officially your tagline, but it should be, perhaps. My guest expert is Tisha Parker Kemp. She's the founder and principal of shiftedacademy.ca. Welcome, Tisha.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're doing a series of various short video sessions, planning to do several with you. For this one, I thought, based on your background, which is both as an entrepreneur with a small team, I believe, and larger corporate settings, that we could talk about what does it mean to stand out? Why would you want to stand out? What are some of the risks? And for that matter, what does standing out even mean? Maybe we might be able to open some people's minds about what that means.
Yeah, standing out is a really interesting concept, and I think a lot of people misconstrue standing out or being an extrovert or being this outgoing person is a necessity of getting ahead. So if you have a goal of moving up the ladder, if you have building a business, all of those things are important when you're thinking about this whole notion of how do I position myself. So I do a couple of things with my clients. There's an activity that I walk them through. It's called an EVP, or an elevated value proposition, and it essentially helps them to understand how they can position themselves in the market so that they are standing out, and not only standing out, but doing it with purpose and strategy. So they're standing out as a leader in their area of expertise. And the outcome of that activity is helping them to position through the lens of their audience, their clients, their employer. What do they view as being a really high level of importance for that job, for that work? And also, is it high in scarcity? And this is kind of a difficult concept to work through for some, because we're looking at it, are you standing out in the market as being not only unique, but above the rest of the crowd, right? You don't want to be playing in the sandbox with everybody else. You want to stand out as a leader, and gaining visibility and doing that in a manner that resonates with the audience. There are, as you alluded to, upsides and downsides to that. I wrote a blog post here not too long ago, and I was talking about this whole, I think, underestimation of what's important. And we often hear people say, well, it's who you know. It's who you know, and those connections and those relationships that you build, that's what's going to get you to that next level. And I think there's also another side to that. With it's not necessarily who you know, but it's who knows you. And the only way that you can get more people to know who you are is to stand out, to be visible. So there's certainly benefits to that. Work finds you. You can be choosier about not only the work that you do, but who you work with. I've been very fortunate over my career. I've spent the majority of it in the corporate sector, and being headhunted is something that happened a number of times for me before I started the business. So there's certainly an upside to it. The downside, well, not everybody is going to like you.
There's a downside.
I think if we park our egos, onto the side and look at focusing on our audience and serving them and helping them solve problems, then the downside is that not everybody's going to agree with us. If you're a people pleaser, your ego may get bruised along the way, but I just think that the benefits certainly outweigh any of the downsides for it.
Gotcha. So that's funny. Just as you were about to say it, like essentially flipping the coin, I guess, instead of who you know, it's who knows you. I hadn't phrased it that way, but that's definitely how I thought. Like, the reason to build a network on LinkedIn, for example, as we were talking about before we went live, that is partly to get to know people that would not otherwise know you. Some people take it too literally that you have to be friends or professional colleagues, which to me is a mistake. But it is, despite LinkedIn trying to make it not a great platform to post content, which is bizarre to me, but maybe because Microsoft acquired them 10 years ago or so, and it's still not quite a real fit. It's a massive platform for people to know you. And because of the network effects of being on LinkedIn and being connected to other people, a lot more people can get to know you. And that, standing out instead of being invisible, a lot of good things. It changes the dynamic a lot, like you said, with headhunting or raising funds or any number of things. If people come to you and you're not trying to potentially desperately get to them, that makes sense.
Absolutely does. And that was one of the reasons why, when years ago people had said to me, why don't you start a business? Why don't you go out on your own? And I mean, I was very happy with the work that I was doing, so it wasn't something that I had really considered. But the whole idea of pounding the pavement and searching for work, it just didn't. That's what I thought it was about, and that really didn't appeal
Yeah.
to me. So when I did end up going into business for myself, pardon me, and realized that the work that I had done to build up that visibility for standing out in my niche area, it made the runway really smooth.
So what do you think about, so a lot of people make that journey from a corporate setting. Maybe they feel like a cog in a machine, with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees, who knows? And they do feel that urge to get out. There's the great resignation that's been happening during COVID. What do you think about, I know a lot of people who are kind of fearful that they don't want to raise their own profile too much outside of work for fear that they're being suspected that they're going to leave, which is potentially, which is probably true these days, right? So how do you, any advice on how people navigate that? If you're going to stand out, there's a reason for doing it. And it may very well be that you're standing out to get out of what the situation is that you're in.
Yeah, there's always that risk. And I do work with some clients who are looking at, they're working full time and they're looking at creating a side hustle and going into business for themselves and creating online content and teaching and coaching and consulting online and all of those sorts of things. And very mindful
Right.
that they don't want their employer necessarily to be privy to those plans. So they're kind of dipping their toe in
Right.
both pools. And
Yeah.
my response when there's hesitation with that is, you're an expert in your area, your profession, and it benefits the employer when you are visible on behalf of their organization, putting out valuable content, writing articles, and submitting, whether it's submitting quotes for articles that other people are writing or what have you. But it's really about setting aside any of the perhaps negatives and really helping the employer see the value. And you don't necessarily have to be completely upfront with them if this is something that you're working on the side and it's a long-term plan and you're going to take a couple of years to do that. You don't necessarily want to rock the boat, but it benefits the employer. So I think it's important to highlight that for them.
Right. Yes, and there's definitely some cultures which, oddly enough, and maybe it's just me, but they don't necessarily want people to stand out. Like there can be some jealousy among managers or executives or something like that, where they don't want to support people that are potentially going to outrun them and take over their job, which it might be a pretty significant motivator actually. To, if you're going to climb the ladder, do you push people off? Not recommending that, but realistically, there's only so much room at the top, and if you're going to climb up there, you're going to need to do something to stand out, because usually people do not get promoted to seriously high positions just by existing, right?
Absolutely. And the organizations or the management style at those organizations, if they are threatened by go-getters, those are not great environments for high performers anyway. They're not going to stay if there is no room to move up. So maybe, and perhaps that's why we're experiencing this mammoth shift in the workforce and people realizing for themselves what they're willing to tolerate and what they're not willing to tolerate anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think it's sort of a mass movement of the workers realizing that they're not cogs. They do have value, and maybe that value would be better recognized somewhere else. But we probably don't need to get into societal commentary in this video. So, I mean, part of the reason we found each other, you are a client of PlexiCam, which is a series of products that we sell, and presenting is one of the key things. Why would you want to have a camera that you can put where you can get good eye contact? Probably because you're presenting one way or another, or you're having meetings, or you're doing interviews like this, or interviewing for a job. Presenting is not usually natural born skill. So for people who do want to stand out through presenting, I think it's kind of a golden age right now because this is much more common. So there's an expectation, finally, that we should probably all level up because this is the new reality. But what have you been seeing as far as any changes in the desire to get better about presenting in the last couple of years?
It's been an interesting roller coaster to watch. So I've been in this online presentation game for 20 years. I started facilitating workshops for what seems like a lifetime ago for the organization that I was working with back then. And it was still very new. And it gravitated, or certain positions, certain types of roles would gravitate towards that platform. So sales positions, it created an opportunity for greater outreach, training and development, professional development, the world that I live in, early adopters. Right. When the pandemic hit, what I saw was this mass panic that the majority of people were struggling to figure out, how do I turn on a webcam? How do I get into this virtual space called Zoom? There was a lot of, right. and what I witnessed was people who were very confident in their presentation skills prior to became very uncertain, and it really shook the foundation. And what the biggest risk that the leadership that I worked with were experiencing is, I don't want to not look like I know what I'm doing. They are used to feeling very comfortable in the spotlight, very comfortable leading team meetings and speaking at town halls and with boards of directors and all of those things. And the pandemic really shook that level of confidence for a lot of people. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster watching the early adopters getting super comfortable for many years, and then this reluctance that people had. Well, I'm not going to turn my webcam on. And so there was, I think, a real kind of dance that people were doing with the technology, and reluctance became, all right, I guess I have to do this, because it was a necessity then of doing business and continuing to work, and the viability of organizations relied on it. What I'm really seeing a lot of now are, there's a comfort level that's there, but there is also a growing appetite for what we were talking about earlier, which is standing out. I don't want to just show up online anymore. I want to show up in a manner that elevates, right? That it's getting to a higher level of professionalism that people were used to in the past. That, yes, in the early days, we were sitting at kitchen tables and sharing spaces and kids running around in the background. And in some cases, that's going to continue for people. But there's a shift that I'm seeing in what people are willing to accept. Now that we are in this space and we've had the time to adjust, how do we get back to, with the audiences that I work with, how do we get back to that level of professionalism? Right.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see, because early on, how long was this going to last? Do I need to worry about it? We started out selling to keynote speakers typically when we first came out in late 2020. And I talked to a lot of professional keynote speakers that they said, I'm just going to sit it out and not do any speaking, which seemed crazy to me. Like marketing money should be pushed in when you're going into a recession if you want to outpace your competitors, right? Why would you take yourself totally off the board and go dark? It just seems so crazy. But, so I think, I think there's plenty of reasons to stand out. I think we covered a lot of reasons why you might be worried about that, how to potentially dance around a bit if you need to create a side hustle. and test the waters before you jump out there, because, you know, being an entrepreneur or going to another firm or whatever it happens to be can feel risky. But I think we covered a lot of ground now in a nice little nugget, which is the goal of these sessions. So if you are interested as a watcher in learning more, this is a series that we're going to be continuing to do. It's called Insight for Pros. I'm Dan Keldsen, co-founder of PlexiCam.com. My guest was Tisha. Thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you. I appreciate it.